Governor DeWine signed the amended substitute House Bill 197 into law several months ago. It is under those regulations that we are holding this meeting. This meeting is a meeting of the West Geauga Local School District Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the West Geauga Local School District's business and is not to be considered a public community meeting. Will you join me in the pledge, please? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Play ball.
Not so much.
Okay. First thing on the agenda tonight, I believe, is the presentation by Rich on restarting and reopening the school update.
Right. Thank you. The Board of Education received a draft of the school reopening plan last week, so you've had the opportunity to take a look at it. I'm going to walk you through it briefly tonight. I'm not going to elaborate a great deal on its contents because there's a significant amount of information there. If the board approves this plan, I would like to post it on the website tomorrow so that parents have an opportunity to look at it, the public has an opportunity to look at it, to offer feedback, and also to answer any questions they would have about the plan. But tonight what I'd like to do is to walk you through this a bit so that you have an understanding of how it came about and what its contents are. Jim, you want to go to the next slide? I've heard the word unprecedented used way too many times this year. It's sort of like the phrase harm's way that came out of some of the Gulf War experiences. I always thought that danger was a pretty good word, and I didn't know why we had to supplement it with personifying the whole process and talking about harm's way instead of danger. And unprecedented is a word that I think is overused in this particular context. I'm not arguing with it, but I hear it often. But tonight I decided to use it, hence its use in quotes. Jim, keep going. This truly has been an unprecedented summer for West Geauga schools. We knew it was going to be a busy one early on last year when we took on two projects that were both very large in scope. The first one was district consolidation. If you recall, we undertook the territory transfer of Newberry local schools to West Geauga schools effective July 1st, actually 11/59, June 30th, 2020. And Newberry schools at that point in time joined the West Geauga family. It was a large process and rather complex. It involved absorbing and assigning new staff from Newberry. It also involved crafting new bus routes, packing and moving an entire school building, and a host of other legal obstacles that took many, many hours and probably hundreds of hours to navigate. We also undertook another project, and that was certainly, I think, less complicated, although it had many of the same components. And that was the reconfiguring of our elementary school buildings, moving from two K-5 buildings to a K-2 building and a 3-5 building. And while that was probably less complex and less noteworthy in many cases, I think it was a more jagged pill in some cases for our residents actually to swallow. But we took both those projects on prior to COVID-19. Now, take those two projects, both of which are large ones, and put them against the backdrop of a pandemic. And you'll see how this summer truly has been an unprecedented summer for the West Geauga local schools. I listed there some of the tasks that are associated with COVID-19 and the House bill that addresses many of the responsibilities of school districts, that being House Bill 164. And I listed for you some of the tasks that we've undertaken this year. And you can see that there are many of them. I'm not going to go over each of them with you. You can read these when you get to the plan. But I want to pay special attention to the last one, because the last one, it says that we're working with our certified staff and classified associations, our unions, to construct and implement necessary MOU. Everything that I'm going to talk to you tonight about is predicated upon the fact that we need to have agreement with our labor unions so that these alterations to a traditional on-site 5-day-a-week, every day, full period teaching schedule can be modified to meet the needs of our children and their families as we face the challenges posed by COVID-19. One of the things I want to remind people of is the fact that certainly we're cognizant of the health needs of our students. We know that COVID-19 is a virus which has many elements still unknown. We know that it affects students in various ways. Typically, the symptoms for young children are very mild. The symptoms for older children are also something which in many cases can be dealt with at home and without the need for hospitalization. We know that for adults, though, the symptoms associated with COVID-19 can be far more serious in most cases than they are for students. So when we look at what we're trying to plan and trying to implement for fall, we do so with the interest not only of our students, but also of our staff in mind. And while this may come surprising to some people, really when you look at the demographics that we're dealing with here at West Geauga, for the 2020-2021 school year, we will have 22 employees in the school district who are 65 years of age and over. So we are aware of the needs of those individuals and of protecting all of our people from the very youngest to the very oldest. Jim, you want to move on to the next one? This is what our reopening plan is. It's a locally developed plan, and it's locally developed by decree of the governor and of the superintendent of the Ohio Department of Education. It's a locally developed plan to reopen schools with safety and health of the students and staff in mind. The guidelines that were published by the Ohio Department of Education state that the plan is to be nimble, flexible, and responsive. That's the words that I took right out of the planning guide. I didn't make those up. Nimble, like unprecedented, is a word that I don't use a whole lot. But nonetheless, basically the idea there is the plan has to be amenable to changing conditions. We get new guidelines, we get new recommendations on a weekly, sometimes a daily basis. So the plan has to be flexible enough to respond to those changing conditions. It's the skeleton upon which we want to base our individual building reopening plans. Those plans are the ones that are going to have an element of specificity that this plan cannot have because it addresses the entire district. We hope to have the reopening plans for the individual buildings published by the end of this week if the board approves this plan tonight. This is an evolving process. The changes and revisions are coming often. And as I say, there's an element to those that lends itself to ambiguity. Most of what we're getting from the state now comes in the form of recommendations and suggestions. I didn't put those words in quotes by accident. There are very few directives. There are very few decrees or mandates handed down. Local discretion is involved in many of these decisions, and that's both a blessing and a curse. In some cases, it would be easier if the state told us what to do. They're saying it's left up to the individual districts depending upon the conditions in those districts. This plan also represents the results of a school reopening task force. And I'd like to thank the people who participated in that task force, many of whom are watching this presentation tonight. There were school staff involved, that was administrators, it was certified staff, classified staff. There were first responders from our community, police and fire. There was a representative of the health department, Tom Quaid, who heads the Geauga County Health Department, was a vital contributor to these discussions and this planning, as there was also a representative of the Board of Education. Next slide, Jim. District plan is not the following. It's not the answer to every question. We cannot possibly answer in a district reopening plan every question that parents could have, or that any resident of the community could have. We cannot answer every question that our staff would have. It is not, absolutely is not a rigid, static document. You'll see at the end of this plan, there is a line for revisions. And I would expect that this plan will have revisions. I'll tell you a couple tonight that I think may be needed. And I would expect it will have revisions right up until the time that school reopens. To help with the questions that the plan will not answer, we propose to post a lengthy FAQ document simultaneously with the school reopening plan. I would like to claim credit for this idea, but I can't. It actually came from one of the parents who communicated us within the last week, because there are so many questions that are specific to situations that cannot be addressed in the restart plan that really need to be answered for parents. Situations such as what would social distancing protocols look like in the respective buildings, how would expectations of students vary from one building to another, and why we're looking at the options we're looking at for delivery of our services. Okay, moving on to the plan itself. You can see that there are two options proposed. One is an everyday in-school option for students with safety protocols in place, social distancing, et cetera. That plan is basically the closest plan to restarting school in a traditional format as we can offer. I say that with caution because our classrooms won't look the same. Our specials won't look the same. Social distancing and the elements that accompany it will require us to have a school building that looks somewhat different than the one people were used to last year. Some of the elements of the elementaries, like the reading circles, will be gone. Tables will be replaced by individual student desks. Those desks will be placed farther apart than normally. This option number one, is the one that most of this plan deals with because it talks about assuring as best we can the safety of students who return to school on site. If schools close, students who are enrolled in option one would move to a remote learning model, and we'll talk a little bit about that toward the end of this presentation. But overall, students in option one are students who would be in school with social distancing protocols and the elements of this plan implemented. Option two is an online virtual program. This is a 100% online program for students who opt to participate remotely from home during the entire school year. It's an online virtual program. For a while, we were calling it the Online Virtual Academy, but I think there are some copyright issues with that, and I didn't want to get us sued, so we switched it to an online virtual program. But it will be a program which will be offered completely online for our students in grades K-12 for the 2020-2021 school year. At this point in time, with 1,244 responses received, it looks as though we have about 20%, slightly over 20%, of our students and their parents expressing a preference for option two. The rest of our students at this stage of the game are enrolled in option one. When you look at the plan itself, you'll see, as I said, that much of it deals with option one. This is the returning in person to school. What we've done for the various categories, and the first one being drop-off, pickup, and visitors, we've addressed two columns of expectations and corresponding responsibilities. On the left side, the student and parent caregiver expectations. On the right side are the staff expectations. We've broken that down further into categories. Parents and caregivers on the left, followed by students. On the right, you can see that the staff expectations fall to teachers, assistants, guidance personnel. There's another category with custodians, another with the administration, and then lastly with the office staff. And you're going to find a similar pattern as we go through this plan when we look at each of these various elements. First one being drop-off, pickup, and visitors. One of the areas where I told you there's a degree of ambiguity that we need to address is in the screening of students prior to coming to school. Notice on parents and caregivers, and bear with me for a moment because I'm not going to read this entire plan to you, or we'll be here till 2 a.m. One of the first elements says, conduct a student wellness check, including taking temperatures prior to sending a student to school. There's been some concern voiced by both residents of the community and also by the board that, and when I say the board here, I speak of a member or members of the board, not the board collective, that perhaps we need to monitor the temperature checks of students at school. There are ways that we could do this, but there are ways that we can do it that I guess we have, well, let me just say this. We have to make sure that they're effective at getting us the result that we want. One of the concerns I think that's expressed with parents having temperatures, and I'm not trying to denigrate parents when I say this, but oftentimes a student can wake up in the morning and say, Mom, Dad, I don't feel very good. My head feels hot. I don't feel very good today. And the parent could say, well, take a Tylenol and see how you feel and send the kid to school, and at 11 o'clock, the kid's sick. But I don't know that our taking that temperature would necessarily yield a different result, because if that were to happen and the child came to school, his or her temperature could be fine when he was screened, and at 11 o'clock, he could still have a spike and would have to come home. So I'd like to draw your attention to the bottom of the second column there, which says symptoms definition: fever, a dry cough, fever and shortness of breath, fever alone, shortness of breath, or an intermittent cough is insufficient evidence of COVID-19. A temperature, a fever in and of itself, will not yield a positive and or a negative diagnosis when it comes to COVID-19. But rather than read all this, this will be on the website tomorrow if the board approves the posting of it, and you'll be able to see the specifics. One other element that I would notice on here is that we would be requiring masks of students, and that's under the students' obligations. Social distancing of 6 feet is going to be maintained whenever possible. And we're also going to be limiting outside visitors to the building so that many of the meetings that parents might be used to having in person would be virtual meetings. The one thing we'll caution parents of in this plan is to please make sure that your son or daughter has everything he needs when he comes to school, because we're trying to avoid the need for parents to come in and drop things off at the office. When we get to the classrooms, you'll find that some of the same issues are covered. One of the things that we're asking of parents this year that is more important than ever is that they maintain up-to-date contact information for us. If we have a student who's diagnosed with the symptoms of COVID-19, we will be calling parents, and we will expect the parents or someone from the family to come and pick up the child as soon as possible. I want to focus just a little bit more here when we talk about classrooms and the emphasis on masks. We're expecting students in grades K-12 to be wearing masks. That's the policy that will come before the board tonight for consideration. Mask breaks will be given to students. Mask breaks will be something that really need to be addressed in the individual building reopening plans, because the mask breaks need to be somewhat different for the younger children than they do for the older kids. One of the ways to initiate a mask break for some of the younger students might be during silent reading, where students are not talking, they're sitting 6 feet apart, they're socially distancing. There might be a 15-minute reading selection students would be doing where they were permitted to take off their masks while they completed that reading assignment. Masks are required for students as well. Face shields may be utilized by teachers at some times when it's important for the students to see their face, either to see the modeling of speech or to notice face gestures, etc. One of the expectations we're asking of students in the classrooms is that when they leave the classroom, they clean their own personal learning space. That means they would, with materials that would be safe, non-toxic materials for the students to use, they'll clean off their own desks and they'll clean off their own chairs, because it's just not physically possible for us to have a custodian in every classroom after every period when students would change at the middle school or high school. We're going to have classroom switches be minimal at the elementary schools, so it would be very rare that the students would have to do this if they were staying in the same classroom for the entire day. But we are asking that students clean their own personal spaces when they leave their classroom or their learning space. We're not asking them to clean up anyone else's space, just their own. We're asking that no classroom materials be shared and the proper hand washing be utilized at all times. With teachers and assistants, one of the things we've asked is that in order to minimize handling of the door handles, et cetera, that the classroom doors be kept open. We ran this past Chief Purchase of the police department and said, what would you recommend here? We want to increase classroom ventilation to keep the air in the classroom healthy. We also know that historically teachers have been advised to keep their classroom doors closed for security reasons. And his advice on this was, considering the nature of the times that we're in and the situation with the virus, I would recommend that you keep the doors open. One of the other questions we had that we couldn't get answers to for some time dealt with the use of fans in classrooms that don't have air conditioning. And we have been told by Tom Quaid from the Geauga Office of Public Health that we can utilize fans, but that the fans should be pointing out to circulate air out of classrooms and to circulate fresh air into the building, but should not be pointed directly at students. The custodians have to disinfect our classrooms thoroughly, as they do all high-touch areas of the building. In order to do that, we've enhanced both the supplies that our custodians have. We've purchased some Clorox 360 machines, which will be helpful not only in disinfecting our classrooms, but also our buses. And we've also hired more custodial help for the upcoming school year. When one looks at specials, it's really the same type protocols as in the classrooms. The same sanitizing expectations will be in place. The same provisions will be in place. Something that's a little bit different about specials is that there are some specials which will now be held, particularly at the elementary level, in the elementary classroom, so students don't have to move. So it looks as though phys ed and the fine arts, particularly the visual arts, will be practiced in classrooms. At this stage of the game, we are not planning outside recess. The reason for that is we really don't have a way to regulate social distancing when the kids are outside at recess. So that could be subject to some change and further discussion, but at this stage of the game, we don't have outside recess planned. Instrumental music looks like it will take place. Mr. Branch, Jason Branch, our band director, has done a great deal of research and a great deal of time planning how we can minimize the spread of any droplets associated with instrumental music. He's actually done some experimentation that shows that the risks there would be very minimal. We don't feel that we'll be able to offer vocal music because singing obviously causes the spread of a lot of droplets, much more so than talking would as a natural occurrence. So with the specials, if you look through there, you'll see that the specials look very, very much like the conditions associated with the classrooms. Okay, moving on to hallways, lockers, and common areas. This is going to vary from building to building. One of the things that we're asking of parents under this section is that you provide your student with water bottles because the water fountains will not be available for use in the schools. Again, wearing of masks is always required when students are at the hallways or at their lockers. In the middle school, lockers are going to be spaced every other locker. At the high school, that's not the case, but students are not to congregate at their lockers. They're to go to their lockers, get their materials, avoid conversations, move to their classrooms. If parents wish to have their students carry backpacks instead of going to their lockers, we can make provisions along those lines. Some schools are looking at the possibility of using clear backpacks. We would not rule that out. However, at this stage of the game, we've not ordered those. We are now saying that students at lockers would not be at the lockers long enough to congregate and to face high risk if they were wearing masks. We're asking the students maintain a sense of direction when they're in the hallways. They walk on the right side of the hall, not on the opposing traffic. Obviously, we're going to have people supervising this. The administrators will be in the hall, assuring compliance as best they can. Some have suggested in some schools that the hallway traffic all goes in one direction. Well, that can pose some logistical problems for you when you get to the end of the hallway and all you have is an exterior door. We can't have students leaving the building and walking the entire way around the building. So we've not instituted any one-way hall traffic regulations. We will stagger perhaps the times in the hallways, particularly at the elementaries, so that students are not overcrowding the hallways. And as I say, at the middle school, it looks as though one of the things we'll be doing is separating the lockers by one locker in between any occupied lockers. Again, custodians are practicing enhanced cleaning protocols in all the high touch areas in the school. Transportation. In transportation, we're asking that parents please make sure in the morning that their students have had their temperatures monitored prior to getting on the bus and that they make sure that the students begin the day with a mask. Honestly, if a student doesn't have a mask, the student's not going to be getting on the bus. And I know that sounds harsh, but we have to be careful. We are going to try whenever possible to limit our students to one student per seat. There will be some routes where that is very feasible. There'll be some others where students may have to be two to a seat. Whenever possible, we'll make sure that those students are family members so that there's not any risk imposed. In some cases, it really would not be feasible for us to do that, not based just upon the number of buses we have, but based on the number of available drivers that we have. Obviously, we are keeping Newberry's buses and we're keeping Newberry's drivers, so our fleet increases significantly in size for next year, but it's a matter of feasibility, and I won't tell you that we can always seat one student to a seat. there may be some cases where we would have to have two students in a seat with a space in the middle. Students are going to load the bus in a particular fashion, much like an airplane. They'll load, they'll go to the back of the bus and be seated first in the back, and they'll disembark from the bus from the front to the back. So that would certainly minimize the need for students to be very close to each other when they were passing each other in the seats. Again, with the facility, with the busing, you're fine, Jim, with keeping that advanced. But with the buses, one of the things that we've done when we bought the Clorox 360 machines, we bought some in mind with the task of cleaning the buses in mind as well. And you'll notice that we've elongated the period between bus trips this year so that once the buses have dropped off students at the high school, middle school, they have time to disinfect the buses before they go on to receive the kids for the elementary trips. Meetings and conferences, I'm not going to elaborate here other than to say we're keeping the in-person meetings to a minimum. Certainly, if you have a child with special needs and there's a requirement that there be an in-person meeting, if you don't have a child with special needs, if you just have a child who you feel requires a face-to-face meeting with that child's parents, you can go ahead and schedule those meetings in person.
Frequently asked
Meetings will be virtual meetings. Virtual meetings will be the ones where almost all of our business is conducted this time. Okay, so virtual meetings will be the rule. In-person meetings will be the exception. With regard to staff or students exhibiting symptoms, we'll have 2 clinics available this year. There'll be a clinic much like what you found when you went to your pediatrician's office when your children were young, and there was a well baby clinic and a sick baby clinic. In this particular case, students who exhibit signs of COVID-19 will be sent to the clinic where the students and or staff report when symptoms of COVID-19 present themselves during the school day. At that point in time, they'll be met by school medical personnel who are going to be equipped with the necessary protective gear and resources to meet the needs of those individuals who may have COVID-19. They'll be sent home, and generally speaking, the period of quarantine at home per the health department is one of 14 days. After which time, when they have release, they will be able to return to school. It's interesting though, I was speaking to a healthcare professional today, someone who happens to be a pediatrician, and I want to point your attention, when we talk about students who have COVID-19, one of the things that was put into our plan was that the return to school would be dependent upon clearance from Geauga Public Health in order to return. I don't know that that's always going to be feasible because in some cases, students report to their pediatricians or report to their medical examiner. They may be diagnosed with COVID-19, but in some cases, they are not given clearance from Geauga Public Health to return to school. So I've elicited the help of someone that all of you know who's back in town. Dr. Tom Phelps is a pediatrician in our area who actually was a member of the Board of Education for some time. And he has offered to help me wade through some of this and to engage in some conversations with the health department. Because in his experience with his practice, he's met students from multiple districts in the area who've come to him with questions. And in some cases, he's felt that the school districts themselves were giving conflicting answers. I don't want to be one of those school districts. So I'm going to meet with Dr. Phelps and we're going to have a conversation with the representatives of Geauga Public Health and come to some sort of agreement in what it would take for a student who has been diagnosed and or suspected with COVID-19 to return to school. And we'll make sure that those precautions are put in place. So that's one more area of a region where I think that we need to have a little bit more clarification to this plan. Other plans are published. They will already say what this says. I'm just telling you right now, based on what I know, I'm not sure that the clearance from the health department is always feasible when it comes to a student who's been diagnosed as either having COVID-19 or being suspected of having COVID-19. One of the issues that I was told in a conversation that I had today is that oftentimes tests will not be administered to anyone between the ages of 3 and 18. That's our whole student population virtually. There are very few kids that we have that are over 18 years of age and still in school. So certainly when we have a student who is suspected of COVID-19, That student will be quarantined for a certain period of time, whether or not it requires the release of the health department to return and or a physician. I'm not sure. It will be one or both. And obviously, as soon as a student is suspected of having the symptoms and or a staff person, the school nurse notifies the custodial staff. They clean and disinfect the area. And we would notify also the parents of the students who were in close proximity to that student, where in the opinion of the nurse, there was a significant chance of risk of exposure. Health services, the next slide basically describes in a more generic detail what I just described in the last one. The last one was how we would deal with students who were identified. This one deals with the necessary precautions that we have to have in place to deal with those students. Notice that under school nurses in the top of the right-hand side, it says wear PPE at all times, wear disposable gown, N95 mask, and face shield when assessing and caring for any staff student exhibiting signs and symptoms of the virus. So this slide deals more with the protocols that are in place in dealing with any of our students, with the idea that some of those students can and will exhibit symptoms consistent with COVID-19 and may in fact be infected with the virus. We move to the next one, dealing with restrooms. The one here that I can't overemphasize too much, obviously masks are required in restrooms, but the proper hand washing techniques, it has to be enforced and has to be reinforced by our staff with the students. I'd like to say that it's the little kids who don't wash their hands after they use the restrooms, but speaking with the voice of many years of experience and having observed people in restrooms, adults also sometimes do not follow appropriate hygiene precautions when it comes to their restroom needs. So we really do have to instill on students the needs to maintain proper hygiene when they're in the restrooms. Again, the custodians have specific directions and specific materials that they'll be utilizing to clean and disinfect our restrooms. All of our cleaning in all of our buildings will be brought to a height that it has never before achieved. And that is, yes.
I have a question. You mentioned earlier or sometime about the bringing water to school and that the water fountains would not be functioning.
Correct.
How do students refill water bottles, or will they? Is that mentioned in here? I didn't see it.
It's not mentioned in here, but I think the only way they could refill them, there'd be two ways that they could do it. If they wanted to drink our tap water, they could utilize water from the cafeteria, but it would have to be given to them.
Yeah.
In other cases, I would suggest probably that they bring a couple water bottles and have them full of water from home.
Can we have water stations or something where they would be able to do that? I suppose that means that you've got more hands touching those dispensers and things. So.
It makes perfect sense that we'd set those up in the cafeteria. That would not be a problem.
Okay.
And I think there'd have to be someone who'd take charge of those so that the kids were not handling, water dispensers that could contaminate other students.
Okay.
We could do that. We could also look at the availability of bottled waters for kids throughout the days in the buildings.
Well, environmentally, I don't want to have bottled water, but I just, one bottle, and the students are going to be carrying other things around with them, and having a couple of bottles that they need to carry if they have places that they can refill, that would be probably beneficial. And
a good idea, and I think it really would be a good process for us to undertake.
Okay, good.
It's very feasible. Thank you.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next one, lunch. This is one that's going to be different in different buildings. Essentially, what we've done in the elementary buildings is to look at how we can spread out the lunch periods and increase the area where students eat lunch, perhaps beyond the lunchroom, perhaps into the gym, sometimes perhaps into the library media center, so that students can maintain social distancing of 6 feet between themselves and their neighbors. Obviously, you know that when kids get together in lunch, they like to socialize. So we have made provisions for the hiring of additional lunch proctors so that we have adequate supervision in the lunchrooms to make the little ones stay in their seats. Part of the problem that I have here with looking at other alternatives, in some districts I know the decision has been made, or at least was suggested, that lunch be served in classrooms. There are two problems with that from my mindset. One is that the teachers deserve lunch also, and it's hardly an uninterrupted, enjoyable lunch for a teacher if the teacher has to sit and monitor 16 or 17 students who are eating lunch. I also know from my own experience as a parent and as a grandparent that a box juice can do a lot of damage. Box juice is basically a cardboard squirt gun. And if I were teaching in a classroom and my son or daughter or grandson or granddaughter were in a classroom, I would prefer that it not be a classroom where students are just eating lunch. So when it comes to sanitizing tables and stools and cleaning up after students have been in an area, it is much easier to do. And I think it's the only feasible place to do it is in an area where it's designated for eating and not for studying and not for reading and doing all the other things that students have to do in their classrooms. So for that reason, in our elementary schools, I'm proposing that we have lunch in designated areas with additional proctors in place to supervise the students, maintaining social distancing protocols, having the students spaced a minimum of 6 feet apart, having them eat their lunches, and then having the area sanitized between each group of students that comes in to eat. I don't think we can achieve that in a classroom. In fact, I know we can't achieve it in a classroom because even telling a student to clean up his or her own workspace doesn't work very well when they've just eaten lunch and there are the associated spills and crumbs and all of the other things that go with kids eating lunch. We also don't have enough custodial staff to send a custodian into every single classroom after lunch and clean that classroom for the students. So this is the only way I think we can feasibly do it for students in grades K through 5. And that is as I described. We're trying something different at the high school in grades 6 through 12. We're moving lunch to the end of the day. So therefore, we're compressing the other periods, moving lunch to the end of the day. In doing so, we'll save about 45 minutes on the student day. And what we will do is have box lunches available for our students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. And we'll also have box lunches available for other students to purchase if they want to on their way out the door at the end of the day. The buses will run approximately 45 minutes earlier than they ran last year. This does two things. Number one, it gets our students in grades 6 through 12 out the door a bit earlier without having to face the task of feeding those kids. It also allows us sufficient time to disinfect our buses and to sanitize the buses between the high school, middle school run and the elementary run. It's really hard to do a thorough job of cleaning a bus if you have 15 minutes between run and the next. It's a lot easier if you have more time. And so it gives us time to sanitize the buses before the little ones get on them for their trip home. In the office, you're going to notice one of the things that's different about our offices. In the middle school, you're going to see a change in placement of the office. It's always been problematic for us that we had visitors to the building coming in, walking through the cafeteria and turning left and going down a hall before they actually made it to the office. In this case, the office has been changed more to the proximity of what it was in the original building, so that the main entrance for visitors to the school is going to be the entrance right by the board office door. Parents can enter that portion of the building, they can go into the vestibule, and then they can turn left and go immediately into the office. We have partitions up in the offices now to afford our secretaries and our clerical staff more protection from people breathing on them. There are slots in those partitions, which are plexiglass, for people to slide papers and anything that you bring to school. You can manage to get to the secretaries without having to violate their personal space in terms of delivering the packages or whatever that you have. We are asking that people, when they come into the office, take their temperature before they come in. Obviously, visitors have to wear a mask. And we will, in the office, as we have in most of our rooms now, in many of our meeting rooms, et cetera, we have capacities listed for the room so that we know in advance how many people can safely occupy that room and maintain social distancing protocols. Okay. Remote learning. If the state and or locally we decide we need to close our schools, we will initiate remote learning. Now, this is for students on option 1. This is a process whereby students in grades K-5 would meet online with their homeroom teacher and or their department teachers only on a daily basis, and students in 6-12 would follow their daily schedules with their regularly assigned teachers. The difference would be that you would not be in school personally with your teachers, you would be communicating with your teachers online. Via Zoom meetings, there are a number of delivery systems that the teachers will be able to use for this. It will be similar to what we had in the spring, but greatly enhanced, certainly more structured. There will be a daily schedule for the student where if you have first period math, first period, you talk to your first period math teacher. Second period, you have English. second period, the time for second period, you'd be meeting with your English teacher, and so on throughout the day. So the difference would be that it would be essentially the same schedule that you have when you're in school, but it would be handled remotely from home. You'd have to sign on, the teacher would have to see that you were there, the teacher would be maintaining attendance, and then the class would proceed. One of the things that I will say is it's not the same being online in a Zoom meeting as it is being in person. So we would ask our teachers, obviously, to plan lessons which allowed for a mixture of online time and also time when they were not online. So that a teacher might begin a class, might introduce new materials and teach for 15 minutes or so via Zoom, and then might send the kids to work on an essay and or some math problems, et cetera, for the next 15 to 20 minutes, and then check with the students again at the end of the period to see that they'd completed their work. Again, this would be for students who are in-school students, in-person, on-site students regularly. That's about 80% of our population next year, we assume, would go to this model if schools were closed. Now, this would not include calamity days. If we have a snow day or we had a day where I closed for excessive heat, et cetera, we would not go on to a remote learning format. This is one where we would expect students to be out for several days, and we would ask that those students be on remote learning. But they would be students who were in the regular on-site program and registered for that program, not the students who are in the online virtual program. Okay, yeah.
Is there, I assume it will be some variant of this process that gets followed if a student tests positive and has to quarantine for 14 days. There'll be something like this. We'll make sure that they are able to continue.
It would actually probably be a modification. Yeah, you're right. I mean, you're completely right, because one of the things that we've asked, if students opt for the online virtual program, we've asked that they give us a 1 semester commitment. Because obviously what we're looking at here, when we're looking at student enrollment, we want to make sure that we can maintain class sizes to the level where we can assure social distancing protocols. But if something arises and a student needs to be quarantined for 14 days, or a member of the student's household exhibits symptoms and the student needs to be quarantined for a time, they could go into the online virtual programming. It probably would not be the remote learning in this model. This is one which is designed for the majority of kids if we go to remote services for our students. But certainly they could move on to the other one for 14 days and come back in, Chet. If there would be a variation of this that would be utilized for them. It would probably fly under the flag of the online learning program, the online virtual learning program.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
No problem. Obviously, we expect that when students go on this, they all are equipped with a Chromebook, and we also want to support families who need Wi-Fi access. So we would make sure that if we went on remote learning, that all the students had a Chromebook and they also had Wi-Fi access. And there are expectations for the students. If you note under that section, you can read those. It says what the students have to do daily to sign in with each of their teachers to make sure that they're there for attendance purposes. Next slide. This is the option 2. Now, everything we've talked about so far has been option 1 and what happens if we close schools to the students who are in option 1, the 80% of our students. Right now, this is option 2. This is the online virtual program. The students who sign up for this know that from the time they sign up for it, they're committed to a semester. They're online for a full semester. If they choose to be online for the full year, they can be online for the full year. It's 100% online. It is taught by West Geauga teachers. In most cases, these are teachers who probably will be teaching their students online for the entire a class that is completely students online. In other words, if this were a math class, your particular math class, if you were in this model, this option 2 would probably be composed of students who were online in the virtual program, so that there would not be students in the actual classroom when the teacher was presenting this option. He or she would be teaching students who are online. There are some rare exceptions where that might not be the case, in which case I'd call the classes almost a slash course. We have certain offerings which are by their very nature a 1 period a day offering. You might look at an AP course in the sciences or in math or in the social sciences. You might look at a music course, for instance, band, where there's one time throughout the day that the students meet for this particular course. In that case, we would be working with the teachers to find acceptable ways for those students who are on the online virtual program to access that class. And we have several ways that can be done. It can be done through Zoom, et cetera. It can be done through webcams if that's and streaming of that class if it's agreeable to the teacher and also agreeable to the other students in the class, because there are certain legal issues that we want to make sure are addressed so that we safeguard both the privacy and also the interests of our students and our teachers. And so we would be looking at those particulars courses are offered as those slash courses. But the students who are on this course would be on this course for a minimum of 1 semester and probably the full year. And the reason for that is not that you cannot move back and forth seamlessly between this and an in-person course, but we are trying to gain a count so that we know that we can socially distance our students who are on site. And if we had students sign up for this and say, well, we're going to be on it, and then the second week of school said, we don't like it, we're coming back, it might put our class sizes over the cap that we've established for social distancing, which, as I say, in most cases is around 17 students in a class. One of the things that you'll see on this plan also moving ahead is some of the other provisions that we've looked at. The next slide deals with social emotional learning and support. One of the things we found in the spring was that some of our students became somewhat disconnected, and online learning was stressful for some of the kids, and obviously it was stressful for some of the parents. So we've taken provisions this year to make sure that we have more plans in place to support our students in this area of need. And if you look in the second column there, under administration, you look at increased supports, you can see what some of those are. We have evidence-based social emotional learning curriculum in grades K-8. We have a district school counselor who is now dedicated district-wide K-12 to meeting the needs of students who might potentially be at-risk students for a number of reasons. And I don't want there to be a stigma attached to that, but we've gone through our students, we've looked at the students we see who've exhibited indications that they might need additional social emotional supports. And we have now assigned a counselor to work with their caseworkers and to work with their teachers to make sure that those supports are met for students. We have a full-time social worker now in the district. We also have a partnership with Ravenwood in their therapeutic behavior support system. We have a restorative justice circles. It's a program that's going on in grade 9 to help our freshmen acclimate to the life and pressures of the high school. And then we also have a youth-led prevention program for West Geauga High School, which involves our students all the way freshmen through seniors. And what it does is it looks at some of the issues that students face and some of the perceptions of the school and some of the realities. And sometimes those are not 100% the same. And it's not to indict the high school, because I think that Mr. Bishop and his team do a nice job of making kids feel engaged and connected. But one of the things that you'll find when you talk to students is you can talk to two groups of students and you think they went to two different schools. And in reality, they're talking about the same school, because their perceptions are not always the same. Their experiences are not always the same. And so what we're trying to do with these increased supports for our kids is to advance equity and opportunity for all of our students. This is something that we would do if we had not gone remote this year. It was driven by perceived needs that we experienced last year in the district. We want to make sure, though, that if we do have to go remote and if we do have an online component, which we know is going to take at this stage of the game probably between a fifth and a quarter of our kids, that we don't neglect to support those students in non-academic ways that they need to be supported as well. We have a list of additional resources that you can access here, and these resources all will give you more guides and more resources to look at, so that when we give you these 3, we could give you 20, but these 3 will give you, they'll probably each give you about 20. So you'll have a lot of reading to do if you choose to do it. And then down here, we have the updates made to this document. Please note that we have just one blank filled in right now because this is the initial presentation to the board. I expect there'll be an addition every week where you'll see some changes to this. And what we'll try to do as we make those changes is in some way track them for you so you can see what they are. I told you 2 areas today that we need to address a little bit further, and that is who takes the temperatures in the morning. Is it going to be the parents, or is it going to be someone at the school, or are we going to implement technology that allows students' temperatures to be scanned as they come in? That may sound like a simple solution, and you may say, oh, you don't want to do it because of cost. Cost would not be the deciding factor there. Student privacy would be a very, very real factor for me. Can that be done in a way that students aren't monitoring each other's temperatures? You might say, who cares? somebody's lawyer. Okay, so we have to be very careful with those kinds of issues. Okay, the next section of this is short, and I'll try to keep it as concise as I can, but I feel that it's something that needs to be brought to the board's attention because it really was something that was generated in my mind by a couple of things. One was expressions of concern that many parents expressed to me over the start date of school. The fact that we were starting August 18th, and there were uncertainties associated with the status of the Geauga County Fair. There were questions that people posed, which usually ended with the following question: why can't we wait to start school until September 8th? Why can't we wait until after Labor Day? And as I've watched more and more school districts around us, I've discovered that what many school districts are doing is either pushing back the start of school to September 8th, that they're going remote, sometimes for the first quarter of the year, sometimes for the first semester of the year. I'm not advocating that, so parents who are cringing right now can breathe a sigh of relief. But what I am looking at with the board, and what I have included as part of the plan, would be the possibility, and it's going to be my recommendation tonight, so whether you approve it or not is certainly at your discretion, that we take somewhat of a blended approach here. Remember I described to you what the remote plan would be for the 80% of our students who currently are scheduled to come to school for the start of the school year, and right now we have about 20% of the students who are looking at the online model. For that 80% who wish to return to school, what I'm proposing is that from August 18th to September 7th, which is a period of about 3 weeks, but there are holidays in there, so it's not really 3 weeks, that we would have the students who are enrolled in the in-person on-site program attending school via Chromebooks in classes taught by the regular classroom teachers for that period of time from August 18th to September 7th. For students who are enrolled in the online virtual programming, this would mean nothing. They are in the program starting August 18th. They would remain in the program, and this would not affect them in the least. In the next slide, what I tried to show you is visually what that looks like. On the left, you see the students who are in the online virtual programming. They start on August 18th. The semester break, is December 17th. And at that point in time, they can decide to either stay on the virtual online programming for the duration of the year and end June 3rd, or they could switch over to the in-person on-site program. For the students who are in the in-person on-site program, the proposal that I just put before you to have them in remote learning from August 18th to September 8th would mean that for that first period of that line, right below the box that says in-person on-site programming, they would be experiencing a remote start to school that would have them online with their Chromebooks, with their regular classroom teachers on a period-by-period basis, with modifications, as I say, to the instructions so that they're not sitting at home on a computer for 7 hours during the day, that they would actually have some breaks in there. They would be on the remote start program from August 18th to September 8th. Then, dependent upon COVID-19 presence in the county, which we're being told is expected to spike, and we don't know that for sure. Right now, we're at a level yellow. We were at a level orange. The levels go yellow, orange, red, and purple. Purple and red being the two most serious, and then in declining risk levels, orange and yellow. And we're in yellow right now, but we were in orange. Depending upon the COVID-19 count, depending upon answers we have related to the status of the fair and students going to the fair, et cetera, I'm proposing that we would then, from September 8th at this stage of the game through June 3rd, have the students back in school on site 5 days a week with the social distancing component in place. That, I think, solves a number of our issues, and that gets into this next slide, which would be reasons for that remote start. It allows additional time for us to monitor COVID spread in Northeast Ohio, particularly in Geauga County. It permits us to make revisions and updates to this reopening plan to encompass the latest suggestions from Columbus CDC and Geauga Public Health. And also, at this stage of the game, I'm expanding the role of the medical community and looking at this because sometimes I'm finding some apparent conflicts between what I'm hearing thus far and what I'm hearing from some medical professionals who have reviewed several area plans. It reduces the unpredictability associated with what I was going to do, because remember when we talked about heat in that time period, and we know that many of our classrooms are not air conditioned. The complicating factor this year is the masks. The masks are hard to wear. They're not comfortable. They make breathing more challenging. I'm not saying in any way that we should not have students wear masks, because I think we need to, but it's harder to wear them in excessively hot temperatures than it is in more moderate temperatures. One of the ways that I said I would deal with this to reassure parents was that I would call calamity days, in which I just close school if it was going to be too hot. So if we had a forecast on a Tuesday for Wednesday to be temperatures in the high 80s, I was planning to close school for that day. Well, I know that introduces an element of unpredictability in it for parents. I didn't have parents complaining about that to me, but it means that you won't know until the day before whether or not school is going to be closed. I know that some parents won't greet the idea of a remote start until September 8th with joy, but I think it at least allows them advanced planning and gives them notice so that they would know that for that period from August 18th to September 8th, their students would be online, and the return to school, the actual on-site return to school, would be September 8th. I think also, while hot temperatures will persist through the month of September, and I remain committed to my statement that I would use calamity days on excessively hot days because of the students wearing masks, that it at least eliminates three of the hottest weeks for us, where the chance of soaring temperatures is greatest. And then also, I think it affords time to introduce our new students and their families to our school buildings with social distancing parameters in place. If I were a Newberry parent right now, I would find this COVID-19 pandemic to be especially troubling, because not only are they sending their children to schools where they don't know the teachers and they don't know the students, they have not had the opportunity to be in our buildings. And they're their buildings now. And there's a certain degree of, I think, distress that comes from sending this little person that you love into a site that you've not yourself had the opportunity to visit. And so during this time period, not only for the Newberry families, but also for families who are new to our district, or for families who would have a student new to a building, it allows us to provide tours of those buildings with social protocols in place to the children who will be back and to their families. It affords us extra time to do that. And I think it would be certainly welcomed by those who have not had students in our buildings if they were able to have the chance to visit them. The other thing that I didn't have on the slide that actually came to my attention today, and I think it's very real, when teachers go back into the buildings and they see the classrooms looking like they'll look this year, and they see the things that they held near and dear to their hearts removed from the classrooms, you know, the rocking chair and the carpet center and the reading center, and they see the class tables being replaced by individual desks, and those desks are spaced 6 feet apart. It is a more stark and sterile place than it ever was before. And I think our teachers need time to wrap their heads around that. With the remote start that we're contemplating, and again, this is pending agreement with the teachers union, our teachers would be on site from the 18th of August through the September 8th time period, where they would have a chance to determine how they can best use these new surroundings to craft their art. There's an artistry to teaching, and we're taking away some of their tools, quite honestly. And I think that this would be an opportunity to give them a chance to view what is going to be their new normal. It's not merely social distancing regulations that require the removal of some of the materials from the classrooms. It's just, to some extent, the inability to clean and disinfect some of those materials, such as carpet, et cetera, to the degree that we'll need to be implementing this year. Okay, last, I'm almost done. From the Geauga County Public Health, I have a statement here that was a press release issued by Tom Quaid on July 22nd. In it, he attests to the fact that he's worked closely with the school districts in Geauga County to develop their plans. He notes what he feels as the appropriateness of the plans, and he recommends that we that we correlate our plans to the state risk level associated with coronavirus infection and the corresponding color charts. The plans that we have in place right now are very similar to the plans you'll see in place in other districts, including districts that are now in red areas. What he is recommending that would be that in Geauga County, we look at these plans, and if in fact the infection rate spikes to anything nearing red, that we revisit them again. And at that point in time, he puts out some options that would include a remote learning option. We already have a remote learning option in place. So I think we're pretty much ready if we were to go to red. But if we did go to red, my expectation is, and I can only speak for Geauga County or for West Geauga, not for all of Geauga County. But if we went to a level of red, such as is currently being experienced in several other surrounding counties, my recommendation to the board, based on where I am right now, would be that we would very seriously consider moving exclusively to remote learning. And my belief is that many other districts in the county would follow suit. We're blessed at this point in time of being in yellow. It would be a long move from yellow to red, but if it were to happen and the infection rate were that high, I would be very challenged to keep our schools open. So at this point in time, Board of Education, you've seen the plan because you've had it since Friday. Do you have any additional questions for me? And then obviously, I think once the community has the opportunity to see the board, the proposal, I'm sorry, if and when the board agrees to have it posted on the website with the corresponding questions and answers from the community, which the board has not seen, then I think that we would have an opportunity to revisit this and make alterations. As I say, it's not a static document. It is very much a work in progress. But this is I think it provides the completeness when coupled with the building plans that will come off this, that some of our parents are desiring before they make a decision.
Hey, do any of the board members have any other questions at this point to ask Rich?
I don't have questions. I just would like to say that I've read the letters from the parents that have come in, and I totally appreciate it. I don't have anybody in school right now. Well, I've got grandchildren, but they're not here. But this seems to me to address the questions that have come forward in a very, very good way, Rich. And thank you to you and to the team for coming up with this plan. I know that there are always going to be more. There are always going to be more questions and more concerns as a loving, caring parent. We want the best for our kids, and we don't want anybody to be in danger. So this looks to me to be, under the circumstances, the very best that we can do. But we're always open. As you said, always open to more input and more questions from the community and from parents.
So is the committee going to stay banded or undisbanded? How's that? So that we can make this a living document. Set up the process by which this would be revised or amended and then voted on. Is the committee going to take the lead in doing that, or is there going to be something else?
Everyone who was on the committee was very agreeable to being a part of the committee. They gave up hours of their summer to come in and remotely, obviously, and to participate in this. I would expect that they would, because many of the people on that committee are people who are in the trenches. They're in the front lines with the kids. And I would think that particularly if the board approves the implementation of a remote start for our on-site students, and the union ratifies that as well, I think that we would have an additional 2 to 3 weeks to really make sure we have everything in place that has answered every question that we can answer. In all honesty, I mean, there are some ways that I can't assure people that there's no risk of infection if a student comes to school. There's always a risk. It's like when you look at a school safety plan and you say, can you give me absolute assurance that my child, when he comes to school, will be safe and that no harm will come to my child from someone coming into the school to inflict harm on kids? We can't. We can't give you 100% assurance. We can give you assurance that we will act in a responsible, reasonable fashion to do our best to safeguard your child. And that's what we're trying to do here. And it will have to be a fluid document. It will have to be a document that is revised, I believe, weekly until we get to the point where schools reopen.
Okay, because I mean, I note, and I'm sure everyone else did, that you left open the possibility of temperature checks at both ends of the bus ride, so to speak. And such a change to this, after we approve it, would have to go through some sort of process, and I'm assuming that this committee would be the ones to implement that process.
Correct. And the board would be apprised weekly of changes to it as well. So the board can have input. Also, I think it's imperative that you are in agreement with it. It's not the creation of one person. It's not the creation of one vested interest. And one of the things we want to make sure of is that we're respectful of the parents in this, because the parents who've asked questions have asked some very good questions, and the parents have offered to help. And I know that there are certain parents who have expertise in certain areas, and we could harness that. I told you the frequently asked questions component came from one of our parents, and our administrators have been working on that. I know Amy put together a lot of questions in response to conversations she had with parents last week, and hats off to Amy Davis and to Nancy Benincasa, because I know they spent hours on the phone talking to parents who were concerned and rightfully frightened and had questions. I've spent a significant amount of time responding to parents by email when they've sent me emails asking me questions. The parents have some good ideas. I'm not saying that every idea that a parent brings to us will be implemented. Some won't be, but some will be as well. So what we've done now up to this point in time is put together a plan that we feel is a very balanced plan, but that is really a workable plan, and one that should reassure our parents that we're doing what we need to do to safeguard the health and safety of their students. What we'd given before, and many parents, as I say, the majority of our parents have already rendered a decision. What we gave before were general pieces of information related to what the plan would look like, but we hadn't yet come out with the details of the plan. And while some parents were comfortable with the general parameters, some were not. And they said, we need to see the plan. We need to have time to read the plan and to look at the plan and to come back to you with questions before we make a decision as to whether or not we're going to have our children return to school in person and on site. It's completely understandable. And I sent out a communication to them last week saying, by all means, wait until you see the plan. I'd like to release the plan next week. When you see that plan and you have more questions, please feel free to let us know. So that's what I'm asking the board tonight. And I put in recently the section on considering the remote start in light of all the changes we have this year. And I'm not complaining or whining about the changes. I'm just stating that we have an inordinate number of challenges facing us this year that are unique to West G. All districts aren't facing these. Many districts are facing COVID-19 challenges. We're facing those against a backdrop of two other major projects. And I really appreciate the unselfish dedication and the contributions of time and energy and work that our staff have given us this year, particularly the administrators at central office, because the July vacation sort of went out the window this year. They're here, and they're here till late. So I thank the parents. I thank everyone who's helped us with this. Our goal is to preserve the safety of our kids and of our staff. And I put high value on both. I want to make sure that our students are safe when they return to school, and I want to make sure that we have provisions in place to keep our staff safe as well.
Rich, I'd like to also point out, Rich, you've mentioned it a couple times already, but I think it bears repeating, that you will, in addition to this document, you'll have the frequently asked questions, which will give a lot more detail. And then by the end of the week, the building specifics will also be published, which will again give a lot more detail than what is in the district overview document. Because I think a lot of the questions that the parents may have are very building specific, And so they're going to look at this document and go, well, you still haven't answered my question. And we understand that, and it really is coming. And it'll be in the frequently asked questions, and it should be also in the building specifics by the end of the week.
Yeah, some of the frequently asked questions are ones that we saw as emerging thematically time after time in the questions parents were asking us. So we've addressed those in the frequently asked questions, and they relate pretty universally to every area. They're just some of the things that would not be appropriate for inclusion in the reopening plan. Others, for instance, my child is going to be at Westwood. If I drop off my child, what door does he come in? What time does he come in? And what social distancing protocols are in place? That's a very specific to Westwood question. That will be in the Westwood plan so that they would know times, locations, et cetera, specific questions about specials in that building. One of the questions that's come forth is what do we do with kids who don't comply? Well, that looks very different at an elementary level versus what we do at a high school level. But needless to say, we'll have to have revisions to all of our handbooks this year prior to the start of school to assure compliance. You don't usually punish a kid for getting within 6 feet of someone deliberately unless they're threatening them. In this case, that could in and of itself be a way to threaten somebody. If a student takes off his mask and moves within 6 feet of someone, well, what was I doing? What did I do? I didn't say anything. I mean, we have to address those kinds of issues. And it doesn't require an overhaul of the handbook, but it does require some board action in terms of approving some minor modifications to the handbooks.
Well, Rich, I think Kathy spoke very well when she said thank you to everyone involved in this, and thank you for all this work. One place where I'm wondering, it seems to be a place where we could strengthen it, and you mentioned it, the kids on the bus possibly sharing a seat. So I'm asking, because of course I know people put a lot of work into this, is it possible for us to charter buses with drivers to do a couple routes so that we could, in fact, have kids one to a seat? I know it'd be expensive. I'm not negating that.
I can't answer that specifically. I would have to look at union concerns for that, Ben, because obviously we don't want to take union work and give it to someone to outsource it on a routine basis. In the case of emergency, certainly, for field trips, et cetera, we can do that, but we won't be having field trips
Right.
in the same nature that we had in the past, according to.
That's why I think that it may be possible that some charter buses are available, because there can't be a lot of charter buses in operation.
I would not imagine so, but it would require certainly a memorandum of understanding if that were the case. The availability of buses itself is not as much a problem for us as it is drivers.
Right.
But you just mentioned something that really is an option we could explore. If the charter companies aren't utilizing buses right now, there may be some bus drivers who are looking for work. I don't know. The frustrating part is when you talk about attracting people to come work for you in a pandemic, it's not as optimal as what one would assume it might be. Normally speaking, people are pretty happy to have jobs at West G. Those of us who work here really appreciate, first of all, the commitment of the community, and also we also are appreciative of the efforts of the board on our behalf. And we have great kids. So it's an enviable place to work in many cases, but in a pandemic, not so much. I mean, one of the questions that we've been asked is, well, what will happen if your teachers aren't at work? If teachers are ill, how are you going to get substitutes? The short answer is, I don't know. We've increased our sub pay by 25%. But many of our subs are retired teachers. So I don't expect that too many people who are in their 70s are going to say, hooray, I get to go in today to a school district in the midst of a pandemic. So there's some issues with regard to staffing, and they're not unique to West G. They're everywhere. We're overstaffed for this year. We're carrying additional staff this year. And when I say we're overstaffed, I know people would take issue with that from me. If I went with the class sizes, what they normally are, we would be overstaffed. We have deliberately decided this year that we would have extra staff on hand so that we could shrink our class sizes and have our attendance in each class lower. And I'm glad for every person we have, to be honest with you. I'm glad we have them all.
Yeah. Well, I think the plan's good, and I think it'd be stronger even if we could get those kids to one kid per seat on the buses. So,
As I say, on some routes, Ben, we know it's already there. You know, we know
Yeah.
it's there on some of our larger routes, it's more challenging. And I don't want to make the promise that we'll say one student to a seat if in fact we can't realize that. We'll do our best to have as few kids seated together on the buses as we're able to do.
But some of that we won't know until the parents come forward and let us know whether they're driving or they're going to be asking for transportation.
And I suspect, yes. And that's one of the questions we have on the survey. I have not looked at that closely yet because I was looking at the numbers with regard to the enrollment options. But I would suspect that many parents this year who can drive their students to school will choose to drive their children to school. It avoids the necessity of a mask on a fairly lengthy transport to school. If you obviously you know as well as I that when you put your kids on the bus, it might take 10 minutes to get your kids to school, and when you bring your kid in a car, when you put the kid on the bus, it could be a 40-minute bus ride because they're picking up other students and they're traveling in a circuitous route to get to the school. When you take your kid to school, assumably take the shortest route, and you cut a great deal of time off it.
But
So
then
we're hoping our parents do.
We run into the additional problem of backup of cars and parents dropping kids off.
We've addressed that in terms of procedures for this year. We're biting our nails a little bit with one of the buildings where we made some alterations to the parking lot, and we haven't seen a lot of action there yet, so Sean's a bit nervous. But we have addressed it in programming senses so that we have made it easier for parents to speed up the process. We have some plans in place for that.
Okay.
Well, Rich, is there any way to have a place where kids can go if they're dropped off early by parents who have to get to work? Not care, but simply a place where they could go and socially distance, wait for their homerooms to open.
There are ways to do just about anything, Ben, in terms of if we have the staff to do it.
Yeah.
I can't ask our existing staff who are already working in conditions that are unfamiliar to them to take on a lot of additional assignments. And I don't want those of them who are listening tonight to think, oh, great, he's going to tell us we have to watch kids before school. No, I'm not. Not at all. But there are ways that we can explore some of those possibilities. I know that, I don't want to go into some of the specifics, but I know Karen Pendler and I talked today about one possibility that would relate to something akin to what you had suggested, not exactly that idea. And I know Nancy and Amy have been involved, particularly Nancy has been involved in dealing with the YMCA, who are putting together a before and after care program for us. Some of these programs also, though, based upon where we go with COVID-19 counts, are speculative. I wish I could give people definitive answers. The rules are changing for us daily, folks, and our plan has to reflect that fluidity and that amenability to change. And I would not disparage any other district or throw stones at any other district, but if districts are pretending that their plans are etched in stone and that they're answering all the questions, they're more effective at public relations than I am, because I know that's not true.
Yeah. Well, what I'm asking about specifically in terms of parents being able to drop their children off early, it would obviously cost us money. I mean, there's no way around it. We know we're going to spend a lot of money on COVID-related issues. And this is one where if we could get parents committing to driving their kids to school, that could free up those seats on the buses and, for possibly, hopefully, a minimal cost.
It absolutely would. And it's something we can look at.
Thanks, Rich.
One of the things we'd have to be concerned with is that we're not in competition with the Y, because I don't think the Y will.
Yeah. Or it could be we pay a subsidy to the Y or something. I mean, something like that.
I'm not going to say no because, as I said, the word's overused, but these are unprecedented times, and sometimes unprecedented times call for out-of-the-box solutions. And we are looking at them every day, guys.
And unfortunately, some of these solutions are going to be costly. I mean, there's no way around it. We're going to spend
all of these solutions are costly. And
yes,
I was joking today with Karen Pendler saying, aren't you the nice one over there, ready to throw money at this? And her response was not typical of a treasurer, but it was typical of an educator. And that was, these times call for exceptional expenditures. So we're not being cheap. We're truly not. And it's rare to have a treasurer who sounds more like an educator than a treasurer. So thank you, Karen.
Okay. Anything else from the board at this point? If not, we'll move on, and we can, if there's other things that you think of, there is a spot for the discussion where we actually vote on the plan. Will be later in the agenda. So I think we need to move on to the financial resolutions.
Yes.
And there
Resolution.
she is, the treasurer that thinks like an educator.
It's hurting me. All right, Resolution 236 to approve the establishment of a new fund for fiscal year 2021 and increase the appropriation to such fund. This is the Coronavirus Relief Fund that the governor is implementing for the 2021 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions?
We've not got all the particulars with this fund. We just have a commitment of this amount of money with very little detail at this point, but I want to have it in place.
Okay, would you call the roll, please?
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Kotowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Mute.
Okay. Yes. Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson.
Yes.
Resolution 237 to approve fund-to-fund transfers. So move.
Second.
These are transfers. We are transferring the Newberry funds into the West Geauga financials. And these were negative balances. As you can see, they're very minor negative balances. So in some particular funds, so we're just transferring from the general fund to clear those out. So they'll zero out these accounts.
Any other questions for Karen? Would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Kotowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth? Yes. Mr. Ramey?
Yes.
Mr. Thorson?
Yes.
Dr. Beers?
Yes.
Resolution 238 to approve increase in teacher substitute pay rate to $125 a day for the 2021 school year only. So move.
Second.
Any questions?
This is
Call.
something that Dr. Marquardt had talked about in an effort to really be competitive for our substitutes as more and more districts are increasing their substitute pay this year.
So just put us at the average or above average, or how does it compare then?
We'll see how we hold out. As we do ours, we'll see how others follow as well.
Okay.
But where does it stand? Where does it stand now, Karen? I mean, we're comparable to what others are doing that have talked about it so far. This is a $20 a day increase for us.
So it stands to reason that others will jump in and
I'm hoping that they don't go over us, but that's where we're at. We're trying to match others as well.
Yeah.
All right.
Call the roll, please.
Ms. Leavenworth?
Yes.
Mr. Ramey?
Yes.
Mr. Thorson?
Yes.
Dr. Beers?
Yes.
Mr. Kotowski?
Yes.
Resolution 231 to approve increase in casual laborer and custodial substitute pay rate to $15 an hour for the 2020-2021 school year only.
Yes. So moved.
Second.
We'll look at this again as we end the year. And if we want to continue that, that'll come back to the board if we continue that to the 2021 school year.
So we're upping the pay for, but how many people have we added?
This is the substitute pay only. So
Okay.
this is normally we would pay $11 an hour. We're going to pay $15 an hour. So it's a substantial increase to get subs, as we do have a number of our custodians that, may or may not be able to come to work at some point during this period of time. They're on the front lines. We are hiring 4 additional custodians, and those are in process. Mark and Sean are looking at reviewing those, and they'll come back to you on August 10th.
Okay.
Okay, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Ramey?
Yes.
Mr. Thorson?
Yes.
Dr. Beers?
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth.
Yes.
Rich, these are yours.
Resolution 240 is to approve the ESY supplemental service contracts for the 2019-2020 school year.
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second.
Take your
Okay.
pick, Karen.
Got it.
Any questions? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Thorson,
Yes.
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey.
Yes.
Resolution 241 is to rescind supplemental contract for the 2020-2021 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? Would you call the roll, please?
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson.
Yes.
Resolution 242 is to approve certified stipends for work outside of the 2020-2021 contractual year.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson,
Yes.
Dr. Beers.
Yes.
Resolution 243 is to approve a certified staff appointment for the 2020-2021 school year. This is pending passage of a background check.
So moved.
Second. Any questions? Call the roll, please.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson,
Yes.
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski.
Yes.
Resolution 244 is a resolution to declare an emergency circumstances and adopt a new board policy 8420.02 on the first and final reading. And this is a policy that relates to face masks and face shields. It's a required policy required by the Ohio Department of Education.
My only question was that with this is, don't we need to make a motion to waive the 3 readings?
Yeah.
Do you? That's
Well, that's what we've done in the past. I
done in
mean,
the past. That's fine. I've seen it done this way, but we can certainly do a resolution, which would be
well, I move that we waive the 3 readings for the policy.
Second.
Hey, would you call the roll, please?
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson.
Yes.
Now I'll move the motion for the face mask policy.
Second. Any questions? Rich, is this pretty well, was this defined by the state, or was it something that we wrote, or our policy people wrote it for us, or?
no, it's something that we developed here specific to our situation.
Okay.
The state had, the guidelines that we had insisted upon face coverings for students in grades 3 and above. The question that we wrestled with, we understand the difficulties of face masks in younger children, but we also had a real tough time when we know that face masks are designed not to prevent the acquisition of the virus, but to inhibit its spread. We had a real tough time telling our kindergarten, first and second grade teachers that the students who might be sneezing on them would not be required to wear face masks, whereas the older students would. In all likelihood, it's the younger students who will be less inhibited about social distancing protocols, sneezing, covering their mouth, etc. So we determined that the only fair and equitable way to do this was to insist upon face masks for all of our students. In situations where students qualify for exemptions, there's a provision for that in the policy. There are corresponding guidelines that we have in place that do not require board approval that specify what that would be. And then there are also provisions whereby teachers might, in certain cases, wear a face mask would inhibit instruction, wear a face shield.
Right.
But it's more universal than some boards are passing because we're not only expecting that they wear face masks and protective coverings when they're within 6 feet of other people, but also when they're maintaining that 6-foot social distancing protocol. And we're insisting that the face masks be worn by our students in grades K1 and 2 as well. So ours
Yeah.
is more extensive than some.
Okay, and we need to get this passed and established now, but we may also be seeing something coming down the road later from Neola as far as how to have the face mask policies too.
Right, but I think that if we have this one in place, I think it's going to at least equal and maybe supersede what Neola will give us.
Yeah. Any other questions? Would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Ramey?
Yes.
Mr. Thorson?
Dan, are you on mute?
Yes, Dan's on mute.
I'm sorry, my dogs are fighting. Yes.
Dr. Beers?
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski?
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth?
Yes.
Resolution 245 is to approve the fall 2020 distance reopening plan.
So move.
Second.
Any questions? Rich, does this include the remote start? Remote start from August through beginning of September?
Yes, it does. And I would have to get something out to our community tomorrow to tell them that is the plan. I would also publish simultaneously with the reopening plan, the Q&As, which is probably about 30 open-ended questions and responses that we've received from parents. I would publish both simultaneously on the website tomorrow if the board gives approval to this.
And then, of course, as you already mentioned a couple of times, I believe that say contingent, it's linked with, maybe not contingent's quite the right word, but with the MOU with the teachers union, which you have been working with extensively, so you don't foresee that being an issue, but it is something that
the union leadership knew that I would be sharing this with the board tonight. However, I gave them the assurance that I would share it with the caveat that this is dependent upon an MOU from the association. They did not voice any opposition to my sharing this with the board tonight, but I will show them the same respect that I show a board when I say I can't assume what the board will do until the board votes. I have to say the same with regard to the union. I await their ratification decision, and if at that point in time,
right.
So our motion is incumbent upon their ratification.
Contingent upon, yes, it is. And I made that very clear to the union that would be the way I would present this.
Okay, any other questions? Would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Thorson?
Yes.
Dr. Beers?
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski?
Ben?
Mr. Katsowski?
My mute is not on.
Now we can hear you.
Okay.
Okay. I have to say it louder. Yes.
Miss Leavenworth?
I don't need to do that, but yes.
Mr. Ramey?
Yes.
Thank you.
And Karen, let the minutes reflect my comment about the contingency, please.
Yes.
And that's what I said I would do to the union representative I spoke with.
I'd like to just thank the administration and this has got to be, I mean, as Rich acknowledged, we're not only dealing with COVID, we're dealing with several other plans that in a regular year would have been quite devastating or difficult to deal with. They have done this with great, I don't know, they've just done their job exceedingly well. And I have to give a thumbs up to how well they have handled this. Thank you for coming forward with this good plan.
Support.
Okay, are we ready to move on then?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Next item is board reports. And I think,
Yes, sir.
yeah, okay, I just got it.
Anyway, as far as board reports, just one comment about the Newberry School property. We received a letter from the Newberry trustees saying that they are asking for a written endorsement permission from our board administration to show the property to potential tenants and to help them come up with potential solutions as they put a plan together to present to us. So they are going to want to tour the potential tenants and service personnel through the properties. Excuse me. When I received this, it looked to me like it was very much like what I would call a house showing. And so we reached out to Dan for his input as well, any subtleties that we needed to be concerned about in providing them a written statement for how to proceed. And so Dan has given us.
Or Bill, just to Dan Thorson.
Thorson.
And yeah.
Yeah,
Just
sorry.
Verifying who you're talking about. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, Dan Thorson, as opposed to Dan the lawyer.
Yeah. Or Dan, yeah, okay.
Lawyer
So
Dan?
As a real estate person, right.
Yes,
Okay.
Mr. Thorson, as a real estate person, we reached out to for insight as to how he would suggest that we proceed. He has given us his insight, and so Rich will be communicating back to the Newberry trustees with that guidance of how we can allow them to essentially show the property to help them come up with a proposal. I believe that's the only board reports and the only information about the Newberry property transfer that I have at this point.
We don't have any problem with anybody looking at the property. I mean,
Well, we still need to, we can't allow people just to wander onto the property.
well, I'm sorry, I did that a few weeks ago. I hope that was all right.
Well, or wander into the property.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
Kathy, I mean, it's not a, I think you have to be very careful with how you bill that. And that's just some of the precautions I talked to Bill about.
Yeah.
I mean, they have to be specified times, and I think they have to be done with our representatives. I can remember doing something in the village of Burton one time, and one of the council people got a little overzealous and took a sample of the siding, and it was lead-based paint, and it almost ended up in a lawsuit. I mean, it was totally innocent,
Yeah.
but it just created its own monster. So, and I'm not saying that we don't know what we have going on there, but I just want to make sure that there's set times and that it's specified to them. If they're doing any kind of, inspections or any of those kind of things, you do that in the guidelines of already having an offer
Sure.
put into
No.
play.
I'm not debating that. That's good.
Well, those are just some of the things that I had talked to them about. I mean, certainly we're not trying to restrict the showing or trying to keep it from being sold, but just trying to keep, just some insight. That's all.
I was just trying to get, when we took our tour, we only looked at the buildings and a cursory glance at the football field. So when I went out there, I was walking around on the further properties, the property to the south that the trustees own.
Did you go back into the woods?
No, I didn't take a hike into the woods, but I was looking at the fields particularly, and I think that's important for people to be able to get a sense of what all of that encompasses. So, but we need to definitely have a handle on who's looking and what they are looking at and when. So I don't have a problem with that.
yeah, I think we've got to be cognizant of our liability of anybody that's onto the property.
Yeah.
What I got worried about was if we give permission, then all of a sudden, that's one day, and then a few days later, as Mark has some people working there, there's other people there, and oh yeah, we're with the township looking at at this. I just think that we should have Mark there, Mark and or Sean each time, and it just, just be specified, that's all.
Yep. I'm
Yeah.
okay with that.
Thank you for your insight, Dan.
Just a quick question to anybody who can answer this. So as the school sits there, I would think we're going to have people wandering onto the property. Maybe people are going to hunt this fall. Maybe people who decide they're going to use the field on their own or park in the parking lot. Rich or anyone, what are the thoughts on that at this point?
Well, if they were hunting on the property, I would certainly hope they were nowhere in the vicinity of the school buildings. I think one of the things that we should ask is, what the guidance would be, what the legal guidance would be related to posting of the property. I don't think we want to look, as though we're being overly restrictive. But I also know that there's a playground there. There are facilities there that we obviously have a liability for those facilities now. So we obviously, we of course need to put up some appropriate signage to advise people of the fact that they're not to be there unsupervised. There's a certain, I don't know how well we can manage the art of doing so, because usually signage that tells people they're not to be on property and that we can't assume the risks sounds somewhat hostile and aggressive in nature. And it may have to legally. One of the things we may have to do with the playground there is make the playground inaccessible by taking down some of the equipment, et cetera. I don't wish to offend people when we do that, but I also don't want to have our residents, who now include Newberry Township, liable for the reckless actions of people who are on that property. So
Do
we'll
we
get
have
some
any-
guidance on that.
Is any of that playground equipment something that we can use or?
I don't know. I think Mark could probably answer that question more fully than I, and perhaps Sean. One of the issues with playground equipment is sometimes it is as costly to dismantle and
Right.
take down and move as it would be to buy new. So I don't know that answer. It's usually anchored pretty heavily in the ground with concrete, et cetera. So it's not a simple matter of, taking down the swing set in my yard and moving it to yours, because I could do that for you easily.
Yeah.
Well, not easily, it's big, but.
Got it.
Okay. There's no other questions, then we have an executive session. And, I stapled one page in backwards. That's my problem. We have an executive session, and we will adjourn to the executive session to discuss negotiations and invite Karen and Rich and
There's Dan McIntyre also, please.
Dan McIntyre and Nancy. Is there anyone else?
I think that does it.
Okay. I'll move to executive session. Is there a second? Okay. There will be no actions taken after the executive session. Would you call the roll, please, Karen?
You're muted.
Dr. Beers,
Yes.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth,
Yes.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson.
Yes.
We got everybody?
Yes, we are back.
Okay. We have a motion to adjourn. I move.
I need a second.
Wait, I have to ask before we leave, like, if we speak of the frogs outside executive session, is that a violation of state code?
They're
It depends
croaking.
on whether Dan unmutes and we can hear them now.
That's right.
Ah, yes.
I need a second.
Second.
Thank you.
You call the roll, please.
Mr. Katsowski,
Yes.
Ms. Leavenworth. Unmute,
Kat-
please.
Unmute, Kathy.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Mr. Ramey,
Yes.
Mr. Thorson,
Yes.
Dr. Beers.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim, for hanging around.
See you guys.
Thanks, Rich. And thanks, Nancy. Thanks for all the work.